In a faraway land, there were some magi, astrologers. These were not Jews, but Gentiles or even pagans. They were a part of an influential class that included men of noble birth and comprised much of the wealth of the nation that they were a part of. Others were upright men that studied the indications of providence in nature and who were honored for their integrity and wisdom. They were the philosophers of that day. This was the group that the wise men that we know in the Christmas story were a part of. One night, they saw a star, well, what they thought, it actually was a light in the sky that they saw. It wasn't a fixed star, though, or a planet. They saw it, and it began a journey for them. And as they saw that, they began wondering, well, what is this light? We've never seen this light before. What could this be? And so they went to the priests in their area and began to ask them, what is this light? And they were drawn to this prophecy that's actually the prophecy of Balaam. It's found in Numbers 24:17. If you'd like to look at it in your Bibles, it says, "There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel." And they wondered, could this be? Could this star that's being talked about right here in this passage, could that be this promised king? Because that's who they believed it to be. As they studied, they pored over the scriptures for a while, and it began a journey. They decided to go on this journey to find this king, to follow this light that had been in the stars. That these were men that studied the stars. Astrology. Have you ever heard of astrology before? It actually comes from Egypt. Way back in Egypt. Have you ever heard of the horoscope? That's where all of it comes from. We're actually look at the stars and they can tell you, your future and what's happening. Of course, we don't really believe in that, but nonetheless, that's what they practice doing, looking and studying the stars and what messages could they find from that. But God used what was familiar to them to draw them in. It's amazing. And it began a journey in their life that ended up changing their life forever. It's truly amazing because God does not go to what you would think. He does not go to the people that you think. You think, well, why didn't he go to the priests? Why didn't he go to the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the religious leaders? That's not where he goes, right? In fact, they're kind of out of the story altogether in some ways. He goes to these men that live far, far away. How far do you think they lived away? We don't know exactly the place they came from, but it's thought they may have came from Babylon. They may have come from Assyria. They may have come from even a farther place than those places. Babylon's a long ways away, so we kind of know about where that is, around 900 miles. That's a long ways. And these are older men. It took them a while to travel this far to Jerusalem. And it wasn't an easy journey. And, we oftentimes, when we see the nativity scene, we think, oh, there's three wise men, right? And they're there in the nativity scene, they're there around the birth of Jesus. But the star appears at the birth of Jesus, and it took them months to arrive there. Months or possibly even a year to arrive there. And these are older men. I don't think they went by themselves either. I don't think it was just 3 men. It could have been 10 men. There was 3 gifts, but it could have been many more. And I think they were a bigger caravan, because when you think about it, the very fact that they traveled across that many miles out in the desert and the challenges of that. They're rich. They have a lot of wealth. They're powerful. And yet, here, if it was just 3 men, there would have been robbers and thieves that were just waiting to prowl on them. Oh, look at these rich men. We can take advantage of them. But no, I think that they had a big caravan and as they traveled, which probably caused them to even take longer to travel. There were dangers. There were probably days that they didn't feel like waking up. It's not easy to travel by foot. And they did. They made this journey. And finally, they arrive in Jerusalem. Before I go there, I just want to, let's read Romans 5:8, because I think their experience that God, the very fact that he went outside of his own people to draw them into the Christmas story is powerful to us. And it speaks to us too. Read with me Romans 5:8. It says, "But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." I love that text. That's a powerful text. But it tells us that God does the same thing with us, right? I mean, maybe some of us can remember back. There was a point in your life where you felt like, I'm nothing, I'm insignificant. I didn't know anything about God, and yet he drew me to him and into a relationship with him. It's the same God that draws us even now. He's always seeking after us. Isn't that amazing? God is seeking for us all the time. And he wants us. He wants you. Will you let him in? Well, when these men finally arrived in Jerusalem, the very first place that they go to, and you can follow along with this in Matthew chapter 2, the very first place that they go is Herod. I don't know why they exactly chose Herod, but he was the Roman ruler of that time. And what do you think Herod's response was? Well, we can read about it here in the Bible. So when they arrived there, in verse 2 it says, "And asked, 'Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him.'" Wow. I mean, think about this just for a second. It truly is amazing that these men, I don't believe they knew very much. They were pagans. They were heathen. They were Gentiles. They weren't among God's people. And I don't think they knew very much. And yet, their faith that is exercised here is incredible. It's incredible that they want to even make this journey in the first place. They're old. Maybe some of them are near the end of their life. And yet, they want to worship God. They realize there's something different here. God is speaking to us. There's a king coming. There's a Messiah. The most important person in this world's history is here. He's come, and they step out in faith. They could have easily thought, well, what if we're wrong? What if this star isn't really what it is? What if the Messiah really hasn't been born? But yet, they stepped out in faith and went, and they were rewarded. Well, what is Herod's response when they ask him that question? Where is the Messiah been born? Well, this is what he says. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. That's part of the reason I believe that this was a bigger caravan that came into Jerusalem. It couldn't be kept quiet. Thoughts and rumors and all kinds of talk were going about as these men enter into Jerusalem. Maybe they had their families with them too. I'm sure they had servants and all kinds of people in this caravan. And Herod is disturbed. Why is Herod disturbed? Why is he disturbed? Well, from the very time that Herod had begun ruling there, he was worried about his kingdom being overtaken. And this was years and years prior to this, long before this. In fact, there had come a point in Herod's life that he was so threatened about his kingdom being taken that he even killed some of his own family. And he even killed one of his wives, prior wives. because he was so threatened. He thought, they're going to take over my kingdom. And so right here, when he hears this, he hears, he doesn't care about the Messiah. I'm sure he's probably heard about the Messiah because he's been in Jerusalem, and this is where the Pharisees and religious leaders are, and they're always talking about the coming of the Messiah. But when he hears about it, the only thing he can think about is he's going to take over my kingdom. He's a little baby, or he's a little boy. He's going to grow up into a man, and he's going to take over my kingdom. And he felt threatened. And he was worried, and he was like, oh man, I got to do something, because that's what his whole life had been. He's got to protect his throne, and he would get rid of people, anybody that would threaten his throne. But that's what happens when power becomes the most important thing. You have to maintain it. And that's what it was for Herod. He had to maintain it. Well, Herod doesn't really know the answer to where the Messiah is born. So what does he do? He goes to the Pharisees and the religious leaders and the priests, and he asks them. And what do they tell him? Verse 5 says, in Bethlehem of Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Wow. What was the response of the Pharisees and the religious leaders as they hear this? And they're relating that. We don't hear anything more about it. We don't hear them going over and investigating in Bethlehem. Okay, we got to find out and see where the Messiah, if it's really happened, if he's really been born. That's tragic. God, even though God did not go to them first, he's still drawing them into the story. He's like, okay, you can go, and he didn't leave them out altogether, but they still missed it. And I think the main reason was because of their pride. Because they thought that and because of what they believed, they thought that the Messiah would be a king when he comes. And if he came into Jerusalem with a lot of hype and a lot of excitement and with riches and honor and glory, they would have bowed down to him. And if he would have said, okay, I'm here, let's go and take over the Roman nation and we'll become an independent nation, they would have been excited. But that's not the way the Messiah came. And so they probably thought to themselves, well, if he were really here, wouldn't he have let us know? Wouldn't he have talked to us? Wouldn't God have revealed it to us? And so they weren't drawn in. That's what I believe. The Bible doesn't say, and silence isn't always, it doesn't make it definitive, but I kind of believe that they didn't go to, or it would have been written down probably if they would have went and found the Messiah, which is sad. Well, Herod, after he talks to the religious leaders, this is what he brings the Magi secretly. In verse 7 it says, Herod then called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. Aha. Herod. It doesn't reveal there, but we know what Herod was thinking. He's like, I'm not really going to worship this king or whoever he is at all. I'm actually going to go and kill him. When these wise men return and let me know exactly where he's at, I'm going to go and kill him. Well, the wise men journey on, and finally they get to Bethlehem, and the star that they've been following all the way is right there above where Jesus is. And he probably was not, I don't know if he was still in the stable at that time. He probably had some other place that he was staying. Maybe he's still there. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say, but he was probably not a baby anymore. He was probably even close to 2 years old by then. Because you remember that star appeared at his birth, and he's traveling, and these men travel for probably over around a year. And he's, I'm guessing, close to 2 years by now. And we know that by the decree that Herod makes in a little while, that also points to that as well. So these wise men, as they come, and finally they arrive at the place where the Messiah is. The star there, and we're told that this star was actually a group of angels that was there. The light of these angels, they enter in, and the first thing that they do is they bow before the creator of the universe. Think about this picture a second, because these were rich men. These were men of power and honor, dignity, and yet they're bowing before a child. That's not what the Pharisees are willing to do, but these men are willing to do that. They're willing to bow down before, because they realize this is once in a lifetime experience. They may never see Jesus ever again, and they're bowing right now before the Creator, the Redeemer of the universe. And they don't come empty-handed. They bring the most expensive gifts, gold, which we know gold is very valuable today. It's much more valuable than the dollar. And frankincense and myrrh, and they lay them down there at the feet of Jesus in awe. This was probably I'm sure this was the crowning act of their lives. And they leave there. They finally found, they didn't give up, finally found where the Messiah was. Well, they begin to prepare for their journey back. Well, they were going to stop in Jerusalem, but that night, they have a dream. It says, don't go back to Jerusalem. Don't go to Herod, because Herod has an evil plan to kill this baby, to kill this boy. And so they head back to their home. And I'm sure, just like on the way there, they were talking about this story. You couldn't keep silent about this. They had to share it with somebody. They had to talk about it. And they were sharing it all along the way. I mean, there were probably people along the way that they shared, we're on our way to find this Messiah, King. And on their way back, they were able to give the rest of the story. And many people believed, I believe, as a result of that. Well, not long after that, what do we find? Herod, when he realizes that he's been tricked, when he realizes that these wise men didn't come and tell him where the king was, he's furious. And he sends out the Roman soldiers and makes this terrible decree that all baby boys 2 years and under are to be killed. Terrible decree. This was one of the most terrible decrees, one of the most terrible massacres that ever happened in human history. Right here. Because Herod was so threatened by someone stealing his power. Well, the Roman soldiers head off to execute this terrible decree. Can you imagine what it was like to be a mother and a father there? Nothing they could do. Their children, their boys that were 2 years and under, killed. And I'm sure some of the parents fought for their kids and were killed in the process too. Wow. It's described here. Actually, is a quote from the Old Testament, but it says in verse 18 of Matthew 2, it says, "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more." Wow. Terrible day. But what happens to Jesus? You know the story. Well, before the decree actually is put into effect, Joseph receives a dream at night and told to take and run to Egypt to protect Jesus. Right there at the very beginning of Jesus' life, the devil was out to end it right there. He's like, if I can get rid of the Messiah, then there's no hope for anybody. Maybe God will do something. Well, they head to Egypt, and it wasn't long after. I don't think it was very long. The Bible doesn't say how long it was, but they stayed there until Herod died. And then, once Herod died, they went back to Nazareth. And that's where Jesus grew up. But Herod, I don't think it was too long after he made this terrible decree that he died. Terrible decree. I think it may have been only a few months or may have been days, and judgment was met out on Herod for this terrible thing that he did. And Jesus was spared. But there were other times in Jesus' life where the devil wanted to get rid of him. And if it wasn't for God protecting him and keeping him safe, that would have happened. This is truly an amazing story. And I want us, there's three things as I close here that I want you to think about. There's three groups of people that all of us can find ourselves in at some point, maybe now or some time in our life. There's three groups of people here. We have the Pharisees. The Pharisees were ones that were, even though they were looking for a Messiah in a different way, they were drawn into the story, but yet when they had the opportunity to be drawn in and even go and worship the Messiah, they refused to do it. They had all this knowledge. They studied the scriptures. They knew way more than the wise men, but yet they refused to go and investigate the Messiah. They had been looking for the Messiah to come for so long, and yet they wouldn't go and investigate and find out if this Messiah really had come. And thus, they were kind of left out in a lot of ways. That's one group. The other group, or other person, Herod. Herod. Have you ever been like Herod? Where power becomes the most important thing to your life. Where Herod actually, he had access to the scriptures right there because the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they studied them all the time, but yet Herod didn't like the scriptures. Maybe because the scriptures convicted his life. And they were also a threat to his power that he had. But nonetheless, he had the opportunities there. But he refused to study, refused to learn more. And we can find ourselves in that same place, that we have the Bible. We live in a country where we have the Word of God right there with us, but yet it can sit on the shelf. And we may not avail ourselves of what is written there and what it's a revelation. It's a love letter from God. We have to spend time with Him. Or the wise men. And this is the group that I hope all of us, even if we're not there at this point, that we will want to be in this group. Because this is the group. They didn't know much, and God went outside of His own people to reach them. They were wealthy. They were much like the Pharisees. They had power and all that, but yet the Pharisees, it corrupted them. They looked good outwardly, but inside they were full of greed and they were power hungry. That wasn't the case for the wise men. They had all the same things, but they had taken a different path. They were humble. They were teachable. And as they were getting to know God, they loved God. And it changed their life. And that's the group that I hope all of us will strive to be a part of. As we begin this new year, in the Psalms, it says that God desires, the most thing that He desires from us, and I believe it's in the Psalm that David spoke while he was making his greatest confession, Psalm 51. What God desires more than anything is a broken and contrite heart. That's what God desires from us more than anything. And this year, as we're beginning the year praying and talking to God, and I encourage you to be a part of the 21 days of prayer. Every day we're doing this on Zoom. Come and let us search our hearts. Let God search our hearts and let us open up our heart to him and let him in and let him teach us what he wants us to this year and let us grow in him like never before. And could it be that it's this very year that Jesus comes back to take us home? Amen. Well, we have a song. Rose and I have a song that we're going to do. It's kind of an appeal song. I want you to think about the words of this because it really talks about what you will do with Jesus. You know, will you let him in? Will you make him most important in your life?